Good afternoon. Good to see you all. Thank you for coming to the spring semester's Dean's Lecture Series lecture of the College of Information. I'm delighted to see you all here. And today we're going to have a special presentation, one I'm really eager to hear. It'll be a conversation. So let me tell you who's going to be the conversants. David Ferriero was sworn in as the 10th Archivist of the United States on November 13th, 2009, and served in the position until April 30th, 2022. He was the first librarian to serve as the Archivist of the United States. The first librarian to serve as the Archivist of the United States. Moving on, yes. His distinguished career includes serving as Andrew W. Mellon Director of the New York Public Libraries, as well as in top positions at academic libraries on the campuses of MIT and Duke. He earned bachelor's and master's degrees in English literature from Northwestern University. His education was interrupted by the Vietnam War. You're not that old. Where he honorably served as a Navy hospital corpsman assigned to a Marine unit in Da Nang, as well as on a hospital ship. Following his military service, he earned a Master of Science degree in Library and Information Science from Simmons College, which is almost as good as the Info College here. Mr. Ferriero will be joined in conversation by Jason R. Barron, who for the past 5 years has been a professor of the practice here in the College of Information. He teaches graduate seminars as well as an undergraduate course entitled Records, Scandals, and Data Vandals. I want to take that course. Before joining us, Jason spent 33 years as a lawyer in the federal service, followed by 7 years in private practice. His time in government includes serving as a trial lawyer and senior counsel in the Civil Division of the Department of Justice and being appointed as the first Director of Litigation at the National Archives and Records Administration. There will be ample time for questions at the end, and we have volunteers who will be running around for questions so that you can answer. And I want you to know that Professor Barron has informed me that there will be a student pop quiz during the next hour with a valuable prize. Pay attention. So let's get the show on the road.
Thanks, Keith, very much. And thank you, David, for showing up. When we talked about this event many months ago, we ended up calling it a conversation, but digital transformation in times of controversy. I don't think we knew how controversial the times would be. So here we are. And in fact, we had this scheduled for February 20th, and there have been things that have happened since. So we're going to get into it. I promised everyone in my classes here that I'm going to ask tough questions. So you ready? Okay.
Shoot.
All right. Okay. Here we go. Let me do this and make sure. See,
I've seen the questions. I haven't seen the slides, and that's what I'm looking for.
So if somebody can do this. There we go. Okay. So Dr. Colleen Shogan, on February 7th, 2025, the first woman to hold the job of Archivist of the United States.
Thanks to me.
All right, we'll get to that. She sent out this tweet. This evening, President Trump fired me. No cause or reason was cited. It has been an honor serving as the 11th Archivist of the United States. I have zero regrets. I absolutely did my best every day for the National Archives and the American people. So what went through your mind when you heard the news?
I was very sad for Colleen, but very sad for my staff. And I do take credit for her being there, since when I was leaving, I told the president, do not, whatever you do not appoint another white male. There have been 10 of us, and this is your opportunity to break that pattern.
So, and then...
But it also, started my worry about what that meant for the agency and what it meant for the records and what it means for the potential loss of our history.
What followed in a strange way was that I'm having trouble here with this, and I don't know why. If I have to, I'm going to get up and do this. Maybe I need a clicker helper. I'm not sure why it's not advancing. Maybe one of you can stay there and just do this for us. Okay, so here's the thing, that before the firing, there was this kind of announcement on ABC that Marco Rubio had been appointed acting archivist, but it wasn't official until some days after Dr. Shogun was fired. And this is very unusual. In my experience, there have been acting archivists that have succeeded vacancies in the archives, but I don't believe in the history of the archives there's been an acting archivist appointed outside of being a deputy.
That's because there's an actual act called the Vacancy Act, which specifies that the deputy steps in that situation. And in fact, the real acting archivist is sitting in the room right here, Jay Basenko.
And Jay, you were deputy archivist, and like others, and the statute says that you're a civil servant in that position, not a political appointee. There's only one political appointment of all of the National Archives. That is actually something that I do want to get to. But so there we are. And as far as I know, well, I wish Secretary Rubio well. He has 3 jobs, as far as I know, as Secretary of State, acting director of USAID, and now acting archivist. So I'm sure he will be busy. Now, okay, it worked.
Wow.
But stay there, Chris. Okay, so here we are. So actually, the acting archivist, Secretary of State Rubio, was on this Signal chat along with...
Shame.
Well, let me ask you about that. So here we have a number of high-level officials. There are certainly questions about whether the sensitive matters that were discussed are classified or not. That's one conversation. But there's another conversation to be had about the records, whether those individuals thought that when they were chatting on electronic messaging apps like Signal, that they were creating records. And some of them were at the White House, and some of them were high-level officials at agencies. And so, what are your thoughts about that?
And then there was that journalist somehow.
And then there was a journalist, yes. So that's still another matter. But let's, what did you think when you heard that story?
First of all, you have to understand that during the transition of administrations, there's always the startup hiccups of the new administration understanding what the rules and regulations are in terms of what they can and can't use, which has gotten very complicated, more and more complicated with each transition because of new and emerging technologies. So I can say, to the best of my knowledge, that the new White House was informed that Signal was not appropriate for their use. And we, in fact, because of the Hillary Clinton problem, a new addition to the Federal Records Act talks about using these kinds of services in cases of emergency, unapproved systems, and that if you do in emergency situations have to use these, then you have to transfer them to your government account within 4 days. That's what the new law is. They were advised that Signal does not meet the requirements. They weren't supposed to be using it. Signal is set up so that it disappears in 4 days.
And yes, and there were features there that at least some said it to be disappearing. And so it's concerning to me, you know, that I've talked about, we're going to talk more about digital transformation, but we're in a world where email was the means of communicating. It still is in the federal government for official business. And email is archived in hundreds of components of government under something called Capstone that you know about. But this is a brave new world of electronic messaging. And so it's understandable in part that maybe not everybody's gotten the message, but that statute that you talk about is from 2014.
That's right.
And one would hope that, that there are ways developed in terms of technology for making it easier for officials to have their messages archived, assuming they want them to be.
So it wasn't just the White House, but it was also the agencies involved in this. And when I was talking about that transition, it's 4,000 positions are presidential appointees. So it means for the National Archives and for the records managers in each of those executive branch agencies, it's training 4,000 new people about what the laws and regulations are. And just before that, ensuring that those 4,000 people who are leaving behind the records that were created during their time in those positions.
Right.
So it's bigger than just the Presidential Records Act.
Well, we'll see whether the government catches up and uses better technology. Okay, so here's an interesting thing that happened on January 6th. Hugh Hewitt was interviewing President Trump, I guess, and president-elect at that point for the second term. And he said some things about you, David. Hugh Hewitt said that, you know, the problems at Mar-a-Lago started because the archivist, that means you, complained to DOJ because he hated you. And goes on to say some pejorative things about what has occurred over the years. So let me just ask you, do you hate President Trump?
No. And I don't know, you know, I've met Hugh once. He was the head of the Nixon Presidential Library Foundation, and he came to visit when he was first appointed. And we had a very pleasant conversation. We never talked about hating anyone. I don't know where, you know, I think this is fake news, to quote my favorite person. I never said that. I would certainly have been during the first term and continued to be frustrated by President Trump, but I wouldn't translate that into hate.
But, you know, the thing is that isn't, understood is the nature of the National Archives. I think it's gotten confused in the public realm about it being at all partisan.
Yeah.
So maybe you can speak to that. You've worked under 3 presidents, and talk about the partisan or nonpartisan nature of what the National Archives is.
It's nonpartisan. We bend over backwards to ensure that it's nonpartisan, and we pay careful attention to ensure that we're paying attention to both sides of the aisle. And as you noted, you know, I worked for 3 different administrations.
And I also, I mean, to me, it struck me as sort of doubly unfair to Dr. Shogan because she wasn't there when the controversy over Mar-a-Lago is taking place, and there we are. So let me ask you about Mar-a-Lago and your. Oh, let me first ask about Presidential Records Act. So maybe you can just give some thoughts to the crowd here about the enactment of the Presidential Records Act and these presidents covered under, from Ronald Reagan on. I've given a quote here about the language that the archivist assumes legal custody on January 20th. And all of these presidents were inaugurated on January 20th of whatever year after their election. So talk to us about the Presidential Records Act.
Some of you may remember President Nixon, and when he left the White House thinking that those records were his, and he took them to California. And that was the cause for the creation of the Presidential Records Act and the government claiming that they were no longer personal property, that they belonged to the federal government. So the way the system works is that, as Jason said, on Inauguration Day, during the ceremony itself, my staff is in the White House grabbing any records that, the records stay in the White House for the entire administration. And it isn't until inauguration ceremony itself that they get transferred to the National Archives. We've made some strides in terms of pre-accessioning some of the electronic records. And I'm talking about just the paper records and artifacts that come during the inaugural ceremony. And that works very smoothly, has worked very smoothly, at least in my experience, until the change between Biden,
Yeah. No.
Yes.
No, between, Obama and Trump.
Obama and Trump.
Yeah. And so, and then Trump and Biden. Trump and Biden, right, that's right.
Biden is the one we want to talk about, I think.
Yeah, and so let's talk about Mar-a-Lago. So I want to know, here we have some.
And we should,
go ahead.
I wrote this out specially, so just so we're all on the same page about, you may be curious about what is a presidential record. And according to the law that you just cited there, 44 USC code.
Yeah.
Documentary materials are any reasonably segregatable portion thereof created or received by the president, the president's immediate staff, or a unit or individual of the executive office of the president whose function is to advise or assist the president in the course of conducting activities which relate to or have an effect upon the carrying out of the constitutional, statutory, or other official or ceremonial duties of the president. Those are records. That's what we're talking about here.
Sounds like a lawyer, yeah.
Yes, well.
Yeah, that's right. And it was a sea change from George Washington through Jimmy Carter, with the exception of Nixon. Presidents could take their records home. They did consider them to be personal in nature. Congress passed a special statute about Nixon's records because of the abuses of power, and then they passed this in 1978, and it applies to every president, that the records are supposed to go into your legal and physical custody. And here we have boxes that were transferred to Mar-a-Lago, and some iconic pictures just for everybody here. Here's another one in a particular room of Mar-a-Lago, and still here with classified records that were set out by the FBI or others in searching the place. So what was your role? You were there during the transition. And then and then afterwards. So in the next year or so,
like a trial.
Yeah, right.
So the way records management is handled in the executive branch is that every agency has a records management unit, and in the agencies outside the White House, the Federal Records Act covers their behavior. So there are individuals, whole staffs, who are responsible for managing the records in those agencies, and a similar staff, 18 people, in the White House, in a unit called the White House Office of Records Management, the WORM, as I call it. And we have a very good relationship with the WORM. We have to have. And the Presidential Records Act doesn't give the archivist much authority. It gives the archivist the opportunity to provide guidance, may provide guidance to the White House, but doesn't say that will provide. And the only teeth in that law is that no destruction or removal of records can happen unless approved by the Archivist of the United States. Those are the ground rules. So as I said, we have a very good relationship. I personally have a very good relationship with the head of the Worm, and called him late in December after the election to wish him a happy New Year. And in that conversation, he let me know that he had been informed that there were 24 boxes of records being stored in the residence. And that's just not standard practice, that the records are being stored in the residence.
The residence at the White House.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that he had been assured, the director of the Worm had been assured that they would be delivered before the transfer on Inauguration Day. So we were on the lookout for those boxes, and it turns out that they weren't transferred to us on Inauguration Day. And in fact, I can remember sitting in my office during the inauguration, watching a split screen of the inauguration ceremony and the Trumps leaving the White House, coming across the South Lawn to the helicopter with a minion behind them carrying a records box. And then saying to myself, what the hell is in that box? So that was the beginning of 13 months of negotiations with Trump lawyers, our lawyer, Gary Stern, dealing with Trump's lawyers, and me personally dealing with Mark Meadows about where are those records. And it took a lot of time to get through, to understand the seriousness of what was going on. And finally, we got a call that they had found 15 boxes. And so we made arrangements to retrieve those 15 boxes. And when we got them, we discovered that, as you can see from the picture, that there were classified records in the boxes. And at that point, we turned the case over to the Department of Justice to deal with. When you turn the case over to the Department of Justice, you have no control over it. They don't report back to you about what they're doing. So I was as surprised as you were to hear about a raid at Mar-a-Lago, and even more surprised and shocked to find what they found.
The idea that there were negotiations going on for a year, legal transfer, physical transfer, is on Inauguration Day to the next president, to you. Do you ever experience anything like that in terms of negotiating over the transfer of records?
No.
Okay. No. So to this day, I believe President Trump, at least his public statements, are that he believes that a good portion of records are his personal records. Well, if you were archivist, if you were reappointed, I don't think you're auditioning for that. But whoever is the next archivist of the United States who's put up and confirmed, what advice do you have for them at the end of this administration in terms of the experience that you've gone through?
Well, the problem for me has always been that we don't know what got away. We know what was in the boxes that have been retrieved, but we don't know what else is missing. And we don't know whether that's everything. And part of it has to do with the basic lack of understanding or feeling of responsibility for a records management program within the White House. In my office, every incoming piece of paper is logged and tracked so that we know what we should be looking for, and there's a disposition, file for all and that apparently things could get on that desk and off that desk without anyone knowing about it. So we don't know. And that's coupled with the fact that we have evidence based on some of the stuff that was transferred to us, of torn up records. We've got baggies of torn up records. We know that there were records flushed down the toilet. And we know that Mark Meadows, during his last month in office, was burning records in the fireplace in his office at the White House. So, that's our history that's disappeared.
Well, hopefully the next archivist who replaces acting archivist Rubio, who will say something. But an archivist has limited powers over a president to manage presidential records. But it is a concern. So there we are. All right. Okay, I'm going to leave this topic, and I'm not going to bring...
Well, there's one more piece of it. What the Justice Department was focused on, and what the case that was dismissed by that wonderful federal judge in Florida,
Judge Cannon, yes.
who went to Duke, that they were focused on the classification issue, that they were more interested in classified records than anything else. And I'm interested in all of it. All of that stuff gone away.
Right. Yes, that case was dismissed because of a finding of the special counsel being appointed in an unconstitutional way. And when the appeal went up, then President Trump was reelected and to a second term, and Jack Smith, the special counsel, dropped the case. So we've left with no resolution on the presidential records issue in terms of whether there had been a violation of the Espionage Act or otherwise. And so there we are. Okay.
And I don't think you have another question covering this, but that claim that he declassified the material is bogus. There is a process for declassification.
Think about it.
Yes.
Yeah, think about it and declassify in his mind without any kind of protocol. Yeah, that's a problem too.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Okay, it's not your favorite topic, but I told you I would ask hard questions. So during your tenure, first there was a march when President Trump was first elected, the day after, a women's march in Washington. And there was a controversy about that at the archives. The archives had an exhibit of the march, and there were posters, and there were about the exhibit.
You were never there. Why are you describing this?
Okay, you go ahead and describe what happened and what you did in terms of acknowledging a mistake.
Okay. So we had a new exhibit opening on the right to vote, women's right to vote. And we have a very clever exhibit staff and a very even cleverer designer who came up with the creation of a lenticular. And a lenticular is an image that changes as you walk across it. And as you walk this way, you see the 1919 march. And if you walk this way, you see the recent Women's March, which was really very clever. And he had selected a UPI photograph to use as the lenticular. And in the process, they were working with Getty Images. Getty Images offers a service of blurring sections, and they chose to blur some bad language in the photo. It was up.
Language of women's anatomy and language about President Trump, yes.
Yes. It set the photograph, the lenticular sat outside the exhibit hall, and it was up for about 6 months before a reporter from the Washington Post, I think, noticed the blurred images and challenged it. And that was the first, I had seen the thing for 6 months and was bragging about how wonderful it was. I never noticed it. So there was a huge hue and cry. I got more input on that than anything else, I think, during my entire time there. We corrected it. We got up the original photograph and redid the lenticular and created it, and admitted we made a mistake. We never should have done that.
As part of that controversy, there was speculation that you had been pressured in some fashion by the White House to blur the images. So maybe you can clear that up.
I was not pressured. No.
Okay.
No.
All right. All right. We will go on from there.
It was a great exhibit. Ruth Bader Ginsburg came, and it was one of our best exhibits.
Let's move on to something that you're proud of. And you established an internal task force on racism in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement. And so can you just say what you had in mind for the archives? I will put up another slide here because the task force itself, this was from a blog that you wrote about when their report came out about the various aspects of the task force in terms of the employee experience at NARA, matters of archival description relating to offensive terminology, and exhibits at museums. So talk to us about the success of that.
We have, just to set the stage, the National Archives is 42 facilities in 17 states across the country, almost 3,000 employees. And we have an internal communications network where we talk to each other, across agency. And after the George Floyd situation, there was a lot of talk, concern, discussion, and raw emotion being shared. And at the same time, I was paying attention to what was going on in the country in terms of institutions looking at naming of buildings and things, and got my hands on the list from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the list of buildings that they were looking at because of concerns about slaveholders or KKK participation. And one of the names on the list was Robert Connor, who was the first archivist of the United States. And I started thinking about what impact that may have had on the early days of the archives. And so created, asked for volunteers for a task force to take a look at us internally and externally, taking a look at opportunities for advancement, recruitment, retention for all kinds of people. And also taking an external look at our exhibit program, how we've chosen topics, and taking a look at our how we've described the collection, how we've actually cataloged things, and launched some important work on reparative description by involving communities affected, most affected communities. And this was all led by, this piece of it was led by Pam Wright, who's was the Chief Innovative Officer. Pam, are you here? She had signed up to come. So the first community involved were the African American community, and the next was the Latino community. And so they have gone through and actually enhanced descriptions of certain collections and used language that is more appropriate than was used earlier. They also recommended a comment, a statement on the splash screen when you first visit the archives, advising that they're, I forget what the exact wording was.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which was hugely controversial
Yeah,
after
well,
the fact.
let me show everybody that. So there was a statement that was developed about,
Potentially harmful.
yeah, the catalog, and some content may be harmful or difficult to view, and people can read that. I'm not going to read
And that
this.
got interpreted by some on the Hill as we've put things on the Declaration of Independence.
So there we are. Yeah, the banner was on a lot of documents, but it was on the Constitution, and it led to controversy.
A fury. Which the new archivist removed.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's right. And the banner is no longer there. And so, you know, I'll leave it at that.
But I must say that reparative description initiative has spread out across the country. Just about every university library is doing something in that, and other institutions are. And it's a fact that it's been picked up by some international folks also.
Okay, it is now time for the promised pop quiz. Now, I want a show of hands of everyone here. Who here was born in the 21st century, from the year 2000 on?
Wow.
It make you feel old, David? So I want for those individuals to be eligible for this pop quiz. And you also, I'm not sure I should do this because it's a difficult one. I don't want anyone to look at a screen on a phone or a laptop. Ready? Okay. So the question is, here we go. How many amendments are there to the US Constitution? I'm waiting for the first person to say it to me from this crowd without looking. What's that? 20. Who said that? That man gets the prize. There's a bonus that I won't make you do, but does anyone know when the last constitutional amendment went into effect? 1992. Maybe you should come up here and whatever. So this is great. After this, do come up because I have the same prize for you as I do for students in my class who take scavenger hunt prizes, which is a pencil with the image of Nixon and Elvis. This is the most requested image or most bought image in the National Archives, not the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. So this pencil is yours afterward. Okay. Now, why am I bringing up constitutional amendments? Well, it turns out...
Before we do that.
Oh, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Can you go back?
Go back.
Can I tell the story
Absolutely.
about this visit? Elvis collected badges, and he was in Los Angeles, and he took the red eye to Washington and took a cab to the east gate of the White House, and with a letter that he had on the flight, he had asked for the flight attendant if they had any stationery, and he wrote a letter to the President Nixon asking to meet with him because he wanted to volunteer for his campaign on drugs, against drugs. And he was flying in, and could he meet? And so he gets in a cab and he goes to the East Gate and hands the guard the letter. And you don't try that because you can't do that these days. And then went to his hotel, and the letter got into Nixon's office, and Nixon's chief of staff, Bud Crow, who's a huge Elvis fan, was so excited that he made sure that Elvis got into that office that afternoon. So Elvis came, and what he was really after was an FBI badge. And I don't know if they still do it, but they used to, at least the two administrations I know of. The left-hand drawer, bottom drawer of the Oval Office desk has all the gifts that they give out to visitors, and they're arranged by value, and the expensive stuff is at the back. And so Elvis, the president opened the drawer and Elvis came around the desk, which doesn't usually happen, and went right to the back and picked something that he wanted. But what he was really after, the conversation finally got around to the badge, the FBI badge, and Nixon said to Bud Crow, can I do that? And Bud said, yes, yes. And Elvis left with an FBI badge.
Okay, so I know that. That's I've lived through Nixon.
We did a program with Bud Crow, and he told the story.
Now, why am I bringing this up? So, in fact, there has been the 1992 amendment, with the 27th Amendment, had to do with Congress being prohibited from giving itself a raise during the same term. It would have to be that legislation went for another term for either upping the pay or diminishing the pay. And Don Wilson actually, by statutes going back, give the archivist the task of ratifying a constitutional amendment. So let's go forward. The Equal Rights Amendment, by the way, there's a fascinating hearing about this 1992 and this, the 27th Amendment, which was originally proposed in the 1790s, and a student at the University of Texas discovered that it had never been ratified and started lobbying for it. It's a really interesting case for Wikipedia research afterwards.
Got a C- on that.
Yes, and he got a C- for proposing, from a professor proposing that this old amendment had never been ratified and could be ratified. So, and then his efforts ended up with 38 states ratifying it. So that's that amendment. But here we have another amendment, the ERA, which essentially says it, prevents. It basically says that equal rights to all people, regardless of sex, was passed in 1972. There was originally a 7-year time frame for the passage. It was extended to 1982, and 38 states eventually passed this. It came in 2000, I believe. I have the, I think it's 1998. Yeah, by 1998, 38 states had passed. But there is a controversy over whether the time had passed for the 7 years or up to 1982, with states continuing to ratify it. And I'm sure you were asked, but here's the thing.
What about the rescissions?
And so, well, there was a statement. Well, you can talk. The statement of Dr. Shogun and Jay Bosanko here said that they were bound by essentially by an OLC, an Office of Legal Counsel opinion, that said that time had passed, too much time for the ERA. But President Biden, in one of his last days in office on January 17th, promoted the idea that the ERA could still be passed, and was quoting American Bar Association. So there's a controversy over this. And my question to you is that if you were archivist and Joe Biden, at the end of the Biden administration, and Joe Biden said to you, I want you to ratify that.
He didn't tell her that. He didn't say that.
All right.
And nothing would have given me greater pleasure than be able to end this debate and ratify it, announce its ratification. But what I stopped short of when I was talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg visiting that exhibit, on 2 occasions, she came and spoke at one of our naturalization ceremonies, and during that visit and at that tour of the exhibit, we had a conversation about the ERA, and in both cases, she said, we need to start over.
There we are. Okay. All right, let's go on to a topic that you are proud of.
And we were advised on both, during the Obama administration and Trump administration, we were advised by OLC, no.
Right.
Because of the rescission, 7 states had rescinded their votes.
Yeah.
and the time problem.
So you were responsible, you were in charge for the standing up of 3 presidential libraries, George W. Bush, the Obama Library, Presidential Center.
Don't call it a library.
Okay, all right, we'll come back to that. And the Donald J. Trump Presidential Library.
Don't you have the Obama Presidential Library?
Well, I didn't put that because of what you're going to tell the audience about its special relation. But here is the presidential library system from Roosevelt, and then Hoover sort of copied Roosevelt. Tell the audience about NARA's role in the presidential library system.
NARA is responsible for all the presidential libraries, technically starting with Herbert Hoover in West Branch, Iowa. Actually, it was FDR was the first one, and then Hoover decided he wanted one. So from Hoover on, the National Archives is responsible for a process that has evolved. A private foundation is created that raises money for building a museum and a library. And the modern presidential administrations have added on some kind of a civic center or policy center. Shortly before I got there, Congress commissioned a report on the future of presidential libraries because of the growing costs of maintaining presidential libraries. The way the process works is that the private foundation raises the money. During the dedication ceremony, the facility gets turned over to the federal government, and then from there on, the federal government is responsible for funding, staffing, and maintenance and all that kind of stuff, with the hope that the foundation provides some kind of support. And that has varied across the system. So this report that was submitted had 6 different versions, 6 different models for the future of presidential libraries. At the time the report was written, presidential libraries took up about 25 or 30% of the total NARA budget. And projecting out 25 years, it was like 150% of the NARA budget would go to presidential libraries. So something had to change. So the Obama people glommed onto one of the models, which is the model that we decided on. It turns out that the Obama Presidential Library, about 90% of a little more than that, of the records were born digital, and there's no paper equivalent. So to take the money to digitize those that aren't already digital and to create the very first all-digital presidential library. So that's the future, that the presidential libraries will be online. So the and so that we have online now, we have the Obama Presidential Library, which you don't have a screen for.
That's right, yes.
And we have the Trump Presidential Library, and those are the digital libraries. What's going on in Chicago is the Presidential Center.
But there's a building there, so what?
It is, it's the Presidential Center, and that's the policy center that I described. And the confusing part of this is going to be the Chicago Public Library has decided to open a branch there also. So there'll be a Obama Presidential Library, public library. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. This is supposed to open in a year.
Yes.
Okay, well, we actually had a little bit of interest on this campus, and there are some of us professors in the room who got involved with an issue involving the George W. Bush Presidential Library, because the announcement was made that the foundation, that NARA would be out of the business of having anything to do with the exhibits at the Bush Museum, that would be completely taken over by the foundation. And so the question in our minds is this a good thing? And we wrote a public letter, some of us in the room here, to the acting archivist, and with a concern about whether foundations, this hybrid, NARA and foundations, libraries, museums, will the foundations do an objective job from a history perspective of portraying presidents if they are solely responsible for running museums? Do you have thoughts on that?
Lots of thoughts. And it's one of those things that was a constant criticism of the National Archives, that the exhibits were skewed in favor of the president, that they're temples to the presidents, even though we try to be as nonpartisan as we can, even in the presidential libraries. The Nixon one was my first.
Yeah, Nixon and Watergate. And Nixon was a private library until it came into the NARA system.
And so they had done a private exhibit of which didn't mention the Watergate situation. Right. So when I came in, I inherited, my first task was working with the folks at the Nixon Library and Foundation to create a new exhibit, which was, I think we did a terrific job. It was difficult, but we told the story in the context of bugs in presidential libraries in general. We had a wonderful map, interactive map that you could point to a president of FDR was a good one, and it showed where all the bugs were in the FDR office, for instance. So it put it in perspective, but it told the story. And grudgingly, the Nixon folks accepted it. This was, the foundation has taken over the museum because of this new model, and I hope what happens is that as we work backwards, we digitize the content of all those other presidential libraries also, so that in the future, people will be able to search a topic across administrations to see how an administration handled a particular part of domestic or foreign policy. That's the goal, long-term goal.
Well, yeah, digital transformation. So you were responsible back in 2012, along with the OMB director, for issuing this memorandum to the government that basically set a deadline for the future, that by the end of the decade, it's sort of like JFK for going to the moon, the end of the decade, 2019, NARA would be going digital, that paper would not flow into NARA anymore. All records after a certain date would be created digitally, born digital or digitized. And this has changed government. This memo that got extended to June 2024, but that's the current, that was the marker, that was the deadline under an extension. Changed the way government archiving, record keeping works from something that the public may think is this, and there are legacy collections at NARA that represent backup tapes and other stored electronic materials as well as paper materials. But this is the way that the government stores its records.
Where did you get that picture?
It's what?
Where did you get that picture?
Which one?
This one.
This one? It's a common copyright. Why?
I was curious. I didn't recognize it from one of our facilities.
No, it's generic, but it represents the entire executive branch. And it also represents when people think of presidential records and transfer, given the amount of emails that are transferred, whatever, you're looking at 99% of White House records transferred at the end of an administration. And this is increasingly the world. So talk about your feelings about the world we're in terms of government records and electronic records.
I think we got to the point, I'm looking at Jay, I think we got to the point where every agency is now creating records electronically, right?
They're supposed to be and managing them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what about the deadline? Have we stopped taking paper?
So there's still legacy paper coming in from decades before, but for records created after June 30th, 2024, it's all coming in electronically to the National Archives.
On schedule.
There were some approved exemptions.
Yeah.
Exceptions, yeah,
But yes.
yeah. And that's the world.
World.
And now you started it with the memo.
But, you know, these records are scheduled. So the electronic records, they stay in the agencies for a certain period of time.
Right. The model's been 30 years in the past.
I know, and
then
they need to, those schedules need to be changed.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Because there's a problem with
I
keeping.
couldn't do everything.
Well, I think you were visionary in pressing, you know, first to President Obama in a 2011 memo that he did, and then having OMB and you tell the government that this is the future. We're getting out of the paper business and we're moving this way. But there are tremendous issues involving AI and search and how one deals with a government where these are the records of the United States at the National Archives.
Exactly. And don't forget the lack of funding to support all of this in the National Archives and in the agencies themselves. Records management isn't sexy. It's not on the top of people's minds, you know, in any agency, certainly not in the White House.
It's not on the top of the minds of certain officials in this administration. Yeah. So yes, and generally, you know, it's not the mission. People come to work to do whatever the mission of their agencies are, and record keeping should be seamless and automated and in the background. And you're responsible for that transformation. You're also had the unique position of being archivist during COVID, and so talk about that in terms of digitization and just what the stresses were at NARA for you know, in the COVID period.
So we were fortunate to get, we had a very good chief administrative officer who came up with a cunning plan to get some of the COVID money to buy laptops for all of our staff. So we could do, and because of the digitization that we had leading up to the COVID situation, we were able to provide a fairly high level of service to our customers because from home, from these home laptops. So I'm really proud of what we learned during that whole process. Our biggest problem had to do with the folks in St. Louis and the VA records that we, because of staffing and because of the shutdown, because of COVID, and because of the incidence of COVID infection among the staff, we fell way behind in terms of processing records. In St. Louis are all the veteran records, all the DD-214 requests.
Military,
from anyone who served in the military for medical, education, burial purposes. All those requests have to come through the staff at St. Louis. And it's still very much a paper-based operation. So that was where our biggest problems were.
I have just a couple more questions, and then I want people to think of their questions. So here, something you're very proud of the Citizen Archivist program. So why don't you speak to that and how people have contributed in terms of transcriptions and looking at older documents?
So when President Obama I was recruited, the selling point for me was the administration thought that the National Archives should play an important role in the administration's open government initiative. And on his first day in office, the president held a senior staff meeting where he told his staff that that the government doesn't have all the answers, and we need to engage the American public in the work that we do. And I brought that back to my staff, and we came up with a plan to create, like the Citizen Science program, the Citizen Archivist program, where we engage the public in helping us do our work. So we started with loading lots of records in cursive. Cursive is a huge problem because it's not being taught across the country a lot in the K through 12 environment. So we've got a whole generation of kids who can't read our records. So we put up a transcription, started with a transcription project, and we've got volunteers from all over the world who are transcribing our records. So that has been so successful that we added photographs to that. Some obscene number of like 43 million photographs in the collection, and not all of them very well cataloged. So adding those to the opportunities to identify people or places in the photographs, and it's been wildly successful.
Great. Couple more things. I just wanted to ask a general question about NARA's future, and how do you see it? Are you an optimist?
I used to be.
Used to be.
Used to be, yeah. I'm really
talk
concerned
about NARA and democracy.
I'm really concerned, not just about NARA, but the agencies in general, as Elon Musk, tears through the executive branch, what happens to the records. We saw examples at USAID where records were being torn up and put in burn bags and things like that. That I'm told has stopped. But what attention has been paid to the records in those agencies as this process works through? I'm really concerned about what is lost in terms of our history in this process.
And what about the National Archives? Well, you project for it a decade, 20, 30, 50 years from now?
It really depends on what happens in terms of appointment of a new archivist and what attention is paid to the needs of the archives.
Okay, I have one more question. This is one of the biggest topics that come up at the archives all the time, and that is UFOs. And so I want you to tell us now, just between us here and this crowd, you know where the aliens are in Area 51, right? NARA has those records, right? So
comment.
It's what?
No comment.
Oh.
When shortly after I arrived, President Obama issued the created, or maybe it was before I arrived, I don't know, National Declassification Center within the National Archives to review millions of classified records going back to World War I. And so we set up a declassification unit, and I had 2 public meetings in Washington for people to give us some advice of what's most important, what are the records that you're after. And I hosted each of those meetings, and they were the results were exactly the same in each of the meetings. The 2 topics that people were most interested in were the JFK assassination conspiracy and UFOs. That was one, and I was so proud of the staff on the UFO front when they came up with an Air Force report, classified Air Force report. We spent, in 1971, I believe, we spent $10 million and contracted with a Canadian firm to build a flying saucer. And we had the schematics for the saucer and the report of the test flight, and it lifted off the ground like 4 feet and crashed. $10 million.
Well, so we're just not going to learn the answer here. It's the truth is out there, or too. Okay, so question. So, all right, I promised everyone that there'd be ample opportunity, and so here we go. First over there, and then in the middle.
Thank you for this. I'd really like to know your thoughts on digital technology and whether we can be confident that, let's say, in 250 years, if we're still around, we would have access to the information the way we do have access to 250-year-old documents today.
Yeah, I'm of the generation where I remember microfilm, and I remember all the mistakes that we made in microfilming newspapers. I grew up in the libraries at MIT, and we had microfilm that was disintegrating while I was there, and that is a huge concern of my concern about digital technology. All these records, how can we ensure that they are going to be available in 250 years? And it's an issue that National Archives is part of a group of international archives, and that the archives of Canada, New Zealand, UK, and Australia are the primary leaders in worrying about this. And I hope there are solutions in development. It's a concern.
250 years is a long time. Adobe Acrobat, PDF as a default may not be around. There was a question in the middle
Let me
here.
just say that we have a wonderful preservation unit in College Park, and they've done extraordinary work in identifying what the issues are around the technology that we have in-house. And they have identified something like 575 different formats that we're dealing with.
There was someone in the middle. Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
My question was about leadership at National Archives, and to what extent does the work of leading the archives, how much of that is governed by laws, and how much of that is governed by kind of norms that are established but not enshrined in law?
That's a very good question, because as the new guy on the block, one of my first questions was, are we required to do that, or is this the way we do it? And so it's a combination. There are regulations, and sometimes it's interpretation of regulation that may cause a bottleneck. So it's a lesson I learned early, but it's a challenge that I often gave my staff about helping us work through this.
Over there.
A lot of the conversation that you've been having regarding President Trump has been about records not making it into the archive.
Yeah.
But given that we've seen things, disappearing from the White House official website and so on, is there a layer of protection between whoever runs the National Archive and the ability to just delete digital information or get rid of physical information?
Ask the question again. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm just wondering, let's say that the acting archivist or newly appointed archivist had a desire to get rid of currently archived documents.
I see what you're saying. Yes,
would they be able to?
That is certainly a concern. That is certainly a concern. And I would hope that that the staff that's in place would blow the whistle on that, so that it can be dealt with.
Well, let me just say, I think it's really important. There's a distinguishing factor between, it's unfortunate that data sets and records are being deleted, basically taken offline, but that isn't necessarily that they're being destroyed.
Right.
So it is incumbent on people to file FOIA requests or to ensure that the records are still there, even though it's unfortunate that they're not online. Yes.
Thank you, David. So I'm Andrew Pace from the Association of Research Libraries. So I'm thinking about the research library role and archives role. I just got back from the Coalition for Networked Information meeting where the Paul Evan Peters Award was given to Vicki Reich and David Rosenthal for their work on Lots of Copies Keep Stuff Safe. So apropos these data rescue operations that are going on and the open government and the digitization of these records, should we be making copies or making lots of copies of these government records in case things do continue to disappear or are ordered to be disappeared by this administration or even future administrations?
It's a huge task.
Oh, okay, we'll go to Wayne, and a question from over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tammy Clegg. I'm an associate professor here in the Info College, and I have a really basic, I think. I've been reflecting, and your talk really just seals the deal, right, on like how important our history is, and that, you know, we have a country that knows our history. And I'm wondering if you can like speak to, or hearing from the expert, right? Like, why is it important for our nation to understand our history, and what is it that some people don't understand about that? I know not necessarily our nation's president or anything like that, but like maybe these people in the middle who are like, you know what, he's got these documents and he's throwing them away, you know, so what, right? Like, what is it that people may not be understanding about the importance of our nation preserving its history?
Well, I'm always stunned by the ignorance of members of Congress about our own history. And one of the challenges is educate, in terms of trying to make the case for funding for the National Archives. We did a lot of work in visiting people in their offices or inviting them for tours of the National Archives to see, you know, up front and personal what our history is. And we got varying levels of interest and success in that process. And it's not something that you would expect. Coming into Washington, and I expected everyone to have some appreciation, love for the country, so through know more about our history than they do. And it's not, and so many of our activities, we have focused on new members of Congress, and I went and visited every new member of Congress and brought with me facsimiles of records that were appropriate for them from where they came from. And I can tell you that 90% of the offices on the Hill are decorated with facsimiles of National Archives records. But I was telling most of them for the first time about this piece of their history. And that often shocked me, that they didn't have a better understanding. It's like they should have, part of their orientation should be a basic US history class.
Hi, thank you for being here. We were talking about the demand for the JFK files, sort of jokingly, but just last month we saw Trump kind of unprecedented.
That was no joke.
Oh, I know. Last month we had him kind of in an unprecedented move, I would say, sort of just unanimously decide that the archivist was going to release the records of the JFK assassination. I'm just curious kind of your thoughts around that, and do you find it worrisome for the president to sort of directly intervene so publicly that way, or what are your kind of opinions on that?
Next to the ERA, the JFK stuff was what I was most anxious to get rid of. Get it out there. Stop sitting on it, because it made us look bad. And I'm really pleased that we finally addressed it. Unfortunately, they violated two very important aspects of declassification, which had to do with methods and sources. The reason that there was stuff withheld is that there were names of agents, as we saw, with their social security numbers in that content, and they were warned in advance that there was PII in the files, and they released them anyway, and there were methods about how we go about doing our work. Those were the two requirements that were set up in that declassification center memo about withholding classified information. So I'm really concerned that that got out. There was a reason for withholding some of that information.
Thank you.
But it's a process we went through every year with trying to release as much as we could.
There, and then in the middle, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a future archivist student here. My question is along the same vein. What is the process like for declassifying government files, and when it comes to like workers having to do it, do they enjoy it, or is it kind of like a pain for them?
They're very excited about the process that was set. I'm pretty proud of the process that was set up by the D-Class team. And it doesn't give my staff, my former staff, the authority to actually make the decision about declassification. It gives us the opportunity to convene the original classifiers to review their work to see whether it still remains classified by those two criteria, methods and sources. So so what happened is they've developed a really good process that involves the original classifying agencies. When I started, there were somewhere around 9,600 original classifiers in the executive branch, 9,600 individuals who could classify. And when I left, it was down to somewhere around 2,300, 2,200 classifiers. But there's still no standards for classification. Like some other countries have standards, so what may be top secret in one agency is not a secret in another. And for most of the intelligence community, there are multiple equities in each classified document. So more than one agency is involved in the classification process, which makes it that more complicated in terms of declassification.
Hi there, I'm Megan Vasquez. I'm a reporter at the Washington Post. So, Presidential Records Act again, I'm sorry. I'm hearing a lot of concerns from the archives community about the prospect of potentially categorizing more presidential records as personal, or the archivist, the future archivist's potential compliance in the destruction of records in ways that a government agency head who's supposed to be independent might not usually do. What's your level of concern about that in this administration specifically, given the context of the disregard for records protocols in the past?
Certainly concerned, and I would say that any attempts to revise the Presidential Records Act would raise flags in Congress, as well as in not only the archival community, the history community in general, I think. But it's something that I'm concerned about.
Let me say to the Washington Post on the record, classified records can never be personal. And the Presidential Records Act limits a very narrow category of records at the White House that consist of diaries and personal notes and personal letters, but there's a very limited discretion on the part of any president to categorize his or her, in the future, her records as personal.
And that has to be established. That has to be established in advance. It doesn't happen after the fact. You don't get 2 years to review everything that's coming from your office.
That's true too. We'll stick around for more quotes. Okay, next. Go ahead. Yeah.
Slightly different question, but I read on the socials over the last couple of weeks about a Doge proposal to move a bunch of magnetic tapes, government records off magnetic tapes onto the cloud, I think it was. And there's like concerns about, it looks like it's old, but actually it's really good for storage, and like it's got really good properties and so on. And I'm very curious about kind of riffing on the question of standards for future digital records, but flipping that to think about storage formats and standards and all these kind of properties for ways of archiving information and records in different formats. How much of this is institutional knowledge in people that are being fired? How much of this is written down? How much of this is mandated? I'm curious about your thoughts about like this institutional knowledge for like the ways that things are being preserved, and maybe you move stuff to the cloud. Oh, sorry, it degraded, right? Like what's your thoughts on that?
No, you go ahead.
No, let's have a conversation. That's a very good question. Let's have it, offline. So we don't have time for too much more, but
I had not heard that. I need to look into that.
yeah.
I got one. Thank you for talking about the amendment to the Constitution process and the archivist's role in that. One other sort of unknown role, I wonder if you can describe certification of elections, presidential elections, which is unknown, and corollary to that, the danger of somebody being archivist who is a biased player in that realm. Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the other administrative jobs of the archives is managing the electoral process, notifying the states and the District of Columbia when the certifications need to be submitted with the names of the electors for the states. And then when the electors meet in the states after the election, the results of those need to be certified and sent to the archivist, and the staff at the Federal Register of the Archives compares the signatures on the final certification to the original list of electors that was sent. So in the last election, there were seven, I believe, false lists of electors that were submitted, and my staff caught those, so they avoided the potential of false election. And so that's all a process that's worked out through the states and the National Archives, and the work is done and then submitted to Congress for the, in that case, the January 6th meeting of full Congress. There was concern about, I saw some concern expressed in the press about the potential for loss of the actual ballots, certifications in that riot that took place on the Hill. But you should know that that was only one copy of those. There's the National Archives has the original copies back down the street.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. That's it. So go right ahead.
Hello, Natalia, Department of Astronomy. My question is more like philosophical. We know that there are countries around the world and government around the world that use history as a weapon, that are trying to rewrite history, like trying to create some parallel universe, right, where that virtual history supports some political intentions of some particular governments. So my question, do you believe that US immune to that thing in the future? If no, then maybe something we could think ahead of that, trying to reduce possibility of such things happen in the future. Thank you.
I didn't understand the question.
So Wayne, could you repeat that for David?
Oh, certainly. So do it again. So the core issue is there are certain countries who have used their revisionist history to meet their current needs. Do you think that we could be in danger of that in the US? And if so, what can we do?
We already are.
Look for things we can do?
Resist. It's a real problem. That's what I mean when I say that I'm concerned about those records and those agencies that are being, eliminated or dumbed down, and what that means for preserving our history, and how this whole period in our history is going to be recorded. And the whole focus on removing DEI across the country is another way of revising our history. It's already underway.
We have a very eager person. Go ahead. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much. First, I want to thank you both for your transparency. I wanted to ask specifically about the process of reparative description. Considering what you said about it, I'm kind of worried that it's going to be classified under DEI programs. And I want to know sort of about the funding and if citizens archivists, can contribute to that. Because also if those are tags that can be taken offline or deleted, like somebody else had said, then the search capabilities are kind of ruined. So I wanted to know more about that and how communities can continue to participate.
I'm assuming that's already been stopped. Has it?
Page that the National Archives, thank you. The page that the National Archives had that highlighted our efforts specific to reparative description has been removed, but none of the underlying work that was done has been modified or changed.
But it's not continuing.
There is no sort of overt program that's being supported, but I think, for example, if you came across something in the catalog, I would encourage you to reach out to the National Archives, and hopefully an archivist would make an adjustment.
All right, well, we will stick around if people want to. I do want to say, David, that when I spent 13 years as a dream job at the National Archives, during my time, we defined permanent records of the United States as records that would be there at the archives for the life of the Republic.
Of course.
And
when does that end?
And I'm hoping that that's a definition of permanent and not temporary records. So let's all thank David Ferriero.